Hey everyone, I want to tell you about Cozy Earth. It's the world's softest sheets. They keep you cool, dry, and comfy all night long. They're moisture wicking, breathable, and they even get softer with every wash. They have PJ sets. Who can't get behind PJ sets? Valentine's is coming up. Get your wife a pajama set. It's Oprah approved. They have free shipping on orders over $50 and a 100-night sleep trial on those bedding sets and a 10-year warranty. And right now, our listeners get to save 40% off using our code INFOGO at CozyEarth.com. Find the link in the show notes. Luxury, comfort, and cool sleep await you at CozyEarth.com. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William.
And I'm Kat.
This is going to be one of those episodes that's rare and far and few between where we have to give a disclaimer. This episode is going to be about parental alienation. It includes themes of family conflict, divorce, custody disputes, emotional manipulation, and the psychological impact on children and parents. Some listeners may find these topics emotionally challenging, especially if they have personal experience with separation, estrangement, or high conflict family relationships.
This episode is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It does not replace professional, legal, psychological, or medical advice. Experiences with family conflict are complex and deeply personal, and this episode is not meant to assign blame or dismiss situations involving abuse or neglect.
Yeah, so we advise our listeners to use discretion in this episode. If the topic feels overwhelming, consider pausing uh, or listening with support or just skipping this episode altogether. If you or someone you care about is struggling with family related distress, seeking guidance from a qualified mental health professional or a family counselor may be helpful. Again, this episode is meant for entertainment and educational purposes only. Now, with that being said, Kat, you want to jump into this one?
Absolutely.
You want to lead it off here?
Yeah. So, what is parental alienation? When a child is turned against another parent.
Parent, checks their phone, there's no reply. Birthdays, they pass without a call. A child once affectionate now speaks in rehearsed phrases. What happens when love is slowly replaced by fear, loyalty test, and silence?
You know, Parental alienation occurs when a child is psychologically manipulated into rejecting one parent, often during or after separation, divorce, or custody disputes.
But full disclaimer here, it can also be with two parents living in the same household. And this episode is about understanding, not blame, right? So we're going to focus on the child's experience, long-term consequences, and a path toward healing.
Absolutely. Parental alienation is best understood not as a single moment or argument, but as a pattern of behaviors that unfolds over time. It doesn't usually happen all at once, and instead it develops gradually through repeated messages, subtle cues, and emotional pressure that reshape how a child sees one parent.
Yeah, so at its core, parental alienation occurs when a child's relationship with one parent is systematically weakened or severed, not because of that parent's behavior toward the child, but because of influence coming from the other parent or a caregiver. And this influence can be intentional or unintentional. In some cases, a parent may be acting out of anger, fear, or just some unresolved hurt. In others, they may genuinely believe they're protecting the child without realizing the psychological cost.
While every situation is different, certain patterns tend to appear again and again. One parent consistently criticizes or questions the other parent's character, judgment, or love. The child hears statements like, "Your dad never really cared about us," or "Your mom always put herself first." Even when said casually or indirectly, these messages accumulate.
Yeah, so the child begins using language that feels rehearsed or far beyond their emotional age. Complaints may sound absolute. He's a narcissist. She's emotionally unsafe. When asked for direct or detailed examples, the child often struggles to provide, well, those concrete details, right?
Mhm. And the child's attitude toward one parent changes rapidly. Affection turns into anger, disgust, or complete withdrawal. Minor mistakes are treated as unforgivable, while similar behavior from the favored parent is excused. And together, these signs suggest something deeper than ordinary family conflict.
What it is not, because this term really carries weight. It's crucial to be clear about what parental alienation does not mean. Not estrangement due to abuse or neglect. If a parent has been abusive, unsafe, or neglectful, a child's rejection may be healthy. It may be a healthy form of self-protection, right? And labeling that situation as parental alienation can cause serious harm. This is why we have to be careful. And this is why at the top of the episode, we said you should seek professional evaluation in these crucial matters.
And it's not simply a child choosing sides. Children naturally feel closer to one parent at different stages of development. Preferences can shift due to personality, schedules, or shared interests. Parental alienation involves pressure and manipulation, not independent choice.
So it's not a single argument or a custody dispute. Disagreements, even heated ones, do not equal alienation. Alienation is about repetition, consistency, and the psychological impact over time. So we have to be very clear about what we're talking about here.
Hmm. Absolutely. And the importance of nuance and assessment. No two families are the same. That's why professionals emphasize looking at patterns, not isolated incidents. Listening to a child's voice without assuming it is fully independent, evaluating behavior from all caregivers involved, and mislabeling can just be as damaging as ignoring the problem altogether.
You know, why the term is so controversial, right? So the phrase alienation has been debated for decades. Some psychologists and legal professionals avoid this term altogether. It can be misused in custody battles. It may oversimplify complex family dynamics, and it has been wrongfully applied in cases involving real abuse. So others use the term descriptively because it captures a recognizable pattern or behavior. It helps explain why some children reject a loving parent with little justification. And it really provides a framework of intervention and healing.
Today, many professionals focus less on the label and more on the behavioral evidence, as well as the child's well being. Parental alienation rarely looks dramatic at first. It usually doesn't involve shouting, ultimatums, or obvious threats. Instead, it unfolds quietly through small, repeated behaviors that slowly reshape a child's emotional reality. Some common tactics that are used consciously or even unconsciously. It's important to note that many of these behaviors happen without conscious intent. A parent may believe they're simply being honest, protective, or venting, but to a child, these messages carry enormous weight.
Yeah, you got to be really careful about what you're saying around those young children because their brains are still molding, their emotions are still developing, right?
Right.
So bad mouthing or subtle character attacks, you know, this can range from direct insults to quiet undermining, right? Your dad never shows up on time. Your mom just doesn't handle stress well. Or just some common phrases. Even sighs, eye rolls, or sarcastic comments send a message. And over time, the child internalizes a negative image of the targeted parent, often without really realizing where it actually came from.
So limiting communication or even visitation kind of looks like phone calls go unanswered, messages are forgotten, visits are shortened, rescheduled, or framed as burdensome, and the child may be told, you don't have to go if you don't want to. And what sounds like freedom of choice is often guided avoidance.
Yeah, when you're going through a divorce, and I've been through one with children, I think the big one though is sharing adult conflicts with children. Children are exposed to legal, financial, or emotional disputes. You know, they just really can't process that. And statements like your mom is trying to take me for everything I have, or your dad cares more about money than he does you. You know, this places the child in an impossible position, forced to emotionally support a parent instead of being supported. And I am dead set against, even when my children were little, I would not let anybody talk about my ex-wife in front of them because that's still their mother. Or, in this case, it may still be their father, it may still be their mother. You should never put a child in those situations.
Right.
But then again, I'm not a professional, so.
Right. Encouraging secrecy or even loyalty tests, the child may be asked, what did your dad say about me? Or don't tell your mom we talked about this. Subtle loyalty tests emerge, praising the child for rejecting the other parent, showing disappointment when the child expresses affection for them, and love becomes conditional at that point.
Yeah, and then even one parent may try to rewrite the family history. Like past events are framed to fit a new narrative. Loving moments are dismissed as fake. Ordinary conflicts are rebranded as proof of cruelty. And the child's own memories, they become questioned. You only think that because you were too young to understand is often the phrase that one parent might put over the child. And over time, the child can begin to doubt their own perspectives of how things actually happened.
Right. To understand why parental alienation works, we have to understand how children survive emotionally. And children don't evaluate situations like adults, they just adapt.
Yeah, desire for safety and approval. So children are wired to maintain connection with their primary caregiver. If one parent controls access to food, shelter, routines, or emotional comfort, the child instinctively aligns with that parent. And agreement feels safer than resistance.
Fear of losing the primary caregiver. Even subtle cues, sadness, anger, withdrawal, can feel threatening. The child may fear being abandoned, being blamed for the parent's pain, and rejecting the other parent becomes a way to preserve stability.
And then you have the developmental inability to see the complexity of the situation. Children think in simpler terms, and they really struggle to hold two truths at once. So think about that. They struggle to hold two truths at once. There's always two sides to every coin. And, they don't really understand how to get both parents' perspectives. So they go with the one that then instinctively helps them to survive, right?
Right.
So both parents are flawed. Everybody's flawed. Nobody's perfect. And that love really doesn't require choosing a side. But this makes them especially vulnerable to black and white narratives.
Psychologists often describe this process as splitting, and splitting occurs when one parent is seen as entirely good, safe, and right, and the other is viewed entirely bad, dangerous, or unloving. This isn't stubbornness or manipulation by the child, it's a coping mechanism. By simplifying the emotional landscape, the child reduces anxiety and internal conflict, but the cost is steep. Loss of emotional balance, suppressed grief, long term difficulty trusting relationships. The list kind of goes on there.
And then the child's inner world, to truly understand parental alienation, We have to move away from adult arguments and legal language and step into the child's emotional world. Because for the child, this isn't about custody schedules or right or wrong, it's about survival.
What the child experiences: confusion, anxiety, and internal conflict. The child receives conflicting messages about the same parent. Memories of love clashes with repeated negative narratives, and this creates cognitive and emotional dissonance or a separation. If I loved them before, why am I supposed to hate them now? Anxiety often shows up as stomach aches, headaches, sleep problems, or irritability.
Hmm, dang, I didn't know that. Pressure to choose sides. You know, through custody battles and when divorce happens, children are often pressured to choose a side. Even without the demands of the parents, children they feel it, right? Love for one parent begins to feel like betrayal to the other parent. And so the child learns approval comes with loyalty. Disapproval follows affection for the wrong parent. And eventually choosing sides feels safer than trying to please everyone. I came from a divorced family. How about you?
Yep.
And my parents never done that. Neither one of them. My mom and dad were very supportive of each other, so it wasn't like I ever felt like I had to choose sides. Never, not once. And on my mom's side, nobody would ever talk bad about my dad when I was around. And on my dad's side, my and I guess that's what instilled me when I went through my divorce is my dad would never let anybody talk bad about my mom either, especially not in front of me anyway, because he would say, "Hey, at the end of the day, that's still his mom." I'm not saying it was perfect because it was not by any means. I'm just saying that's how they handled things.
Loss of autonomy in forming their own opinions. Children stop trusting their own thoughts and memories. Their emotional responses become scripted rather than felt. And the question shifts from how do I feel to what am I supposed to feel? This loss of inner voice can linger well into adulthood.
Yeah, those short-term effects, these are internal struggles that don't stay hidden for long. They surface in behavior. You have like emotional withdrawal. The child may become quiet, distant, or numb. They disengage from activities they once enjoyed. Teachers and caregivers, well, they'll start to notice the child shrinking emotionally.
Sudden anger or rejection toward one parent. Anger often replaces grief. The child may refuse visits, use harsh or absolute language, show no empathy or guilt for the rejected parent's pain, and this anger feels empowering, but it's usually masking fear and sadness.
And then you have that increased behavioral or academic issues where concentration suffers under emotional stress. So as you think about it, grades may start to drop, behavioral issues can appear, like defiance, acting out, withdrawal from peers. This is often misinterpreted as discipline problems rather than distress signals. I've often heard that, but I don't recall anybody ever acting on that. And I don't think the child really knows what they're doing. They just know they're trying to get attention, maybe from the parent that they feel alienated from.
Right.
I'm not a psychologist. I don't know.
You're probably on the right track there.
Yeah.
In any case, there is long term psychological impact here. Even when childhood ends, the emotional imprint often remains. Trust and attachment difficulties. The child grows into an adult who struggles with closeness. Love may feel conditional or even unsafe. They may fear abandonment or even push people away before they can be hurt.
And then you have that increased risk of depression, anxiety, and identity struggles. Chronic self-doubt can take root. Often they may think if my feelings were wrong, then can I trust them now? And as adults, they may report persistent anxiety, low self-worth, difficulty defining their own identity separate from family narratives.
They may have difficulty maintaining relationships, as conflict may feel overwhelming or even intolerable. Black and white thinking can resurface in adult relationships. Patterns repeat: idealization, sudden rejection, emotional distancing, and without awareness, the cycle can quietly continue into the next generation.
Kat, I say let's take a break before we get into the alienated parents experience. What do you say?
Sounds good to me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
William, I know how you love matcha tea with coconut milk.
Yeah, it's clean energy without a crash.
Then you'll love Mantra Matcha. They offer super premium ceremonial matcha and 6 superfood infused flavors made from the finest, youngest tea leaves for a naturally sweet, ultra smooth taste.
With each flavor, it's infused with powerful superfoods like cacao, ginger, and goji berries. And they also have those classic favorites like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, plus superfood berry, ginger beet, and rosehip dragon fruit. It's organic, non GMO, gluten free with 0 grams of sugar. You can enjoy it like me, or maybe hot or in a smoothie like Cat. Every purchase helps provide meals to kids through No Kid Hungry.
It's at mantramatcha.com. Get 15% off using our code INFOGO at checkout. Both links are in the show notes.
Hey, everybody, we want to tell you about strong coffee. Every morning it starts with a choice. You can settle for just coffee, or you can rise up with strong coffee. And it's the world's strongest cup of joe. Strong isn't just a drink, it's a movement. It stands for striving to reach our natural greatness.
It's born from one simple need: to be better. They rebuilt coffee from the ground up, infusing organic coffee with collagen, protein, nootropics, and functional ingredients that fuel your body and sharpen your mind. No crash, no compromises, just clean energy, focus, and flavor that fires you up.
Yeah, so whether you're chasing kids, chasing goals, or chasing greatness, don't just do it with coffee, do it with strong coffee. And our listeners can save 20% off just by using our code INFOGO at checkout. Hey, if you're looking for your favorite band or sports team or TV show, check out Old Glory. They've been in operation since 1969 and they have over 300,000 items. They have from the Beatles all the way to Metallica, NFL, NBA. It really doesn't matter what you're looking for. They have tees, hoodies, hats, gifts, everything a true fan could ever want. And it's family owned and operated. They have fast shipping, free standard delivery on every order. And you know what? Our listeners get a 15% off at checkout using our code INFOGO. You can find the link in the show notes. So now that we're back, let's dive into it. Let's get the perspective from the alienated parents' experience. Because it's devastating for the children, true, but it also inflicts a deep and often invisible wound on the parent who's being pushed out. This experience is not just painful, it is psychologically destabilizing.
There is definitely an emotional and psychological toll. There's grief without closure. Alienated parents often describe their loss as a living grief. There is no funeral, no goodbye, no clear ending, and the child is still alive, but emotionally unreachable. Milestones pass in silence: birthdays, holidays, graduations, and the grief has no timeline and no socially accepted outlet.
Wow, that's hard.
Mhm.
That is tough. The thing you said about there's no funeral, no goodbye, no clear ending, like I can't even imagine that of not being able to see my children or having that interaction with them.
Right.
And then you have chronic stress, helplessness, and isolation. Many of these parents live in a constant state of vigilance, waiting for that text, checking social media for signs of life. Legal systems, they often move so slow, while relationships, they disappear quickly. Friends and family may not understand or may grow uncomfortable with the ongoing pain. And isolation, well, it only deepens as support quietly fades away.
The feeling of being erased from a child's life as photos disappear, traditions vanish, the parent's role is rewritten or denied altogether, even. Being treated as if you never mattered can fracture identity and even self worth.
In the face of this profound loss, even well-intentioned parents can react in ways that unintentionally worsen the situation. you know, Over defending themselves. Parents may feel compelled to explain, justify, or correct every accusation. And this can overwhelm or pressure the child. And the child hears defense as conflict. And conflict just feels unsafe.
Pressuring the child for reassurance and asking questions like, "Do you still love me?" and "Why won't you talk to me?" While understandable, these questions place emotional responsibility on the child, and the child may withdraw further to escape the burden.
Speaking negatively about the other parent, responding to alienation with counter alienation, often backfires, and it really reinforces the child's belief that loving both parents is dangerous, and the child feels trapped between two fires.
Mm.
I mean, man, I can see parents putting their children in the middle when they go through these lengthy custody battles or these very messy divorces.
There's healthy responses, though. Incredibly difficult, some responses are more likely to protect the child and preserve the possibility of future reconnection. Maintaining a calm, consistent presence, gentle messages of love without pressure, showing up when allowed, without interrogation or guilt, and repeating a simple truth: "I love you and I'm here when you're ready."
Wow, that's a powerful statement to come from a parent. You know that?
Hmm.
Documenting patterns rather than reacting emotionally. In my line of work, I've often been told I have to take the emotion out of the situation and use professional judgment. And really, that's what they're saying here. And it does take a lot of practice, but keeping that, keeping factual records of missed visits, communication blocks, and behavioral changes, well, what you're doing is you're creating that clarity for courts and for professionals and the parent themselves. Documentation, it replaces that emotional reactivity with grounded awareness.
Prioritizing the child's emotional safety over winning should always be the goal, and shifting the goal from being right to being safe. Accepting the repair may take time and oftentimes years. Trusting that consistency, patience, and emotional integrity matter more than immediate outcomes.
So the role of divorce, custody, and the courts, well, parental alienation doesn't happen in isolation. It often emerges in the most emotional, charged environment of all: high conflict, separation, and custody disputes. And this is when adults are overwhelmed and children become the emotional battlefield.
But why does alienation often emerge during high conflict separations? Well, legal battles intensify loyalty pressures. Court proceedings force families into adversarial roles. Parents are encouraged, sometimes implicitly, to prove the other parent is unfit. Children pick up on the tension quickly, and even without being questioned directly, they sense which narrative is safer to align with.
Yeah, so from the children's perspective, they become leverage, intentionally or not intentionally. Time with a child can become currency. Access is rewarded or withheld. Affection becomes evidence. A parent's emotional distress, well, it may spill over. They may say things like, if you loved me, if you wouldn't, you wouldn't want to go. Man, I can't imagine telling a child that if they loved one parent more than the other, they wouldn't want to go see that other parent. That's just crazy to me. I can't even
Mhm.
imagine unless it is an abusive situation.
Right.
But in these moments, children stop being children and they start becoming proof points in adult conflicts.
There are challenges in the legal system. Family courts face a nearly impossible task, protecting children while navigating incomplete information and intense emotions. There's difficulty proving psychological manipulation. Alienation is rarely overt, and there are no bruises or clear incidents. It unfolds through tone, repetition, and emotional framing, things that are hard to document. Judges often rely on snapshots, not patterns that develop over years.
Yeah, and parental alienation isn't something that just happens overnight either, right?
No.
But balancing protection versus parental rights, courts they have to weigh on the legal system. A child's stated preferences, each parent's rights, allegations that may be sincere but often unverified, and moving too quickly in these cases, it it really does often risk harm to parties involved. But moving too slowly, well, it just really allows these patterns to solidify.
There's risk of mislabeling abuse as alienation, and this is one of the most serious concerns. In some cases, claims of alienation have been used to dismiss or minimize real abuse, and that's why a credible evaluation is essential. No claim on either side should be accepted without careful scrutiny.
Yeah, because courts they can't see inside family systems alone, and they really rely on trained professionals to play a critical role. Like family therapists, and these are really trained in high conflict dynamics. And not all therapists are equipped for these cases. High conflict families require neutrality, pattern recognition, child centered focus, and skilled clinicians can distinguish between fear based rejection and manipulation based rejection. And again, that's why at the top of the show, we said this is educational, and you should, if you feel like this, you should seek professional help.
Right. Guardians, ad litem, and child advocates. These are professionals that are appointed to represent the child's best interests. Their role is not to choose sides, but to observe, listen, and report. When properly trained, they provide courts with a more complete picture of the child's lived experience.
But there is healing, intervention, and hope. After so much pain, it's natural to ask a hard question. Can anything be repaired? And the answer is complicated, but it's not hopelessness, right? But healing is rarely quick. It's going to take time, and it's not going to be perfect in the end, but it is possible, especially when the focus stays on the child's emotional safety.
Early intervention is key. Education for separating parents, and many parents don't realize the harm their words or behaviors can cause. There are education programs to help parents understand one, how children internalize conflict, and two, why neutrality matters more than validation of anger. Even small shifts, what is said, when, and how, can interrupt the alienation process early.
Co-parenting therapy and communication boundaries. Well, high conflict families benefit from structured communication. Limited topics, written platforms, clear roles. Co-parenting therapy, it focuses on reducing the emotional spillover and keeping adult issues between adults. So presenting a unified front where possible, even without emotional closeness. So the goal is not friendship, but to be a functional corporation.
When alienation has already taken hold, rebuilding requires restraint, humility, and time. Patience and gradual reconnection, as reconnection often begins with brief, low pressure contact. neutral activities, and predictable routines. Trust grows slowly when it has been damaged or even broken. Okay, just flat out broken.
Yeah.
Damaged is one thing, broken is a whole other. Um, Rushing the process can also reignite fear or even resistance.
And I think really reframing the message, I'm here when you're ready. I think you said it earlier, and to me, I think that should resonate with both parents, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like that phrase, it really removes the pressure and restores the choice back to the child. And it reassures the child that love is not conditional. It allows the child to approach it just at their own pace, without the fear of confrontation or disappointments.
Try avoiding guilt based appeals. Statements like, I missed your whole childhood. Do you know how much this hurts me? And these may be true, but they burden the child with responsibility for adult pain, and healing requires freeing the child from that weight.
Yeah, so in many cases, reconnection doesn't happen until the child is an adult. So, what does reconciliation look like? As adults, they often reconnect years later. Distance from the primary influence allows independent reflection. Life experiences, parenthood, therapy, loss, all of this can trigger the reevaluation. And many adults, after they go through this as children, they report a a moment of clarity, where something it just didn't add up.
Acknowledging grief for lost time. As reconciliation doesn't erase what was missed, both the parent and the child may mourn years that cannot be recovered. So, naming that grief without blame creates honesty and emotional depth.
I think forgiveness without erasing the accountability, forgiveness it does not require denial. It allows healing while you can still acknowledge the harm. And accountability, well, it means naming what happened and understanding the impact and choosing to move forward differently. But again, you have to call it for what it is in order to move forward.
Absolutely. So, what can parents do? Keep children out of adult conflict, speak respectively or neutrally, at least, about the other parent, and encourage independent thinking.
What friends and family and professionals should watch for is when children start repeating adult language, extreme one sided narratives, sudden personality changes toward one parent.
And why talking about this matters? Because silence allows harm to continue. Awareness helps protect children's emotional development, and children deserve the freedom to love both parents without fear, pressure, or punishment.
That was the basis of this episode, is just educational, because I feel like knowing is knowledge, right? And this show is all about being curious.
Hmm.
And and maybe if you're going through some difficult times in your life, maybe this will help you understand or seek uh, help if you need it, or ask for help if it's needed, either
Right.
or. But
Absolutely.
but I think really, honestly and truly, you should never, if you're going through that, you should never pit your children against one parent or the other, regardless.
It's certainly not a fun time for the child.
No, because we're all human. We make mistakes. People make mistakes. Adults make mistakes. And you shouldn't use the children as leverage for those mistakes.
Right. And even if it doesn't happen while the child is still of developmental ages, okay? When that child does become an adult, even at that time, it's not too late to take accountability and acknowledge what happened and everything, okay? Even as an adult, it's still important for that child's closure and emotional well-being, even if they have sought help and emotionally healed from that themselves.
I think that's pretty well said. I mean, honestly and truly, when I found this topic, I didn't know anything about it. I've never heard of this before, ever. I can't remember where it came from, but thought this was a pretty good topic.
It is. It is very, very educational for sure.
Yeah. And our disclaimer at the top, like I said, I guess I should.
We are not professionals.
I'm definitely not a professional. I probably need a professional.
Yes, me too. Same. But in
Um,
any case, that's all I have. If you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
if you would like to help us keep the show going, you can do so at Patreon, and that link is in the show notes.
As always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Whether you just tuned in or been with us from the start, thank you.
Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go
Over there, you can share with us your show ideas.
or ask us a question.
But make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcast. If it's Apple, it's the little check mark in the top right hand corner. If it's Spotify, it is going to be the check mark underneath the show. And if it's iHeart, it's going to be the follow button in the top right hand corner.
You can also send us a text using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Leaving that review does help others find us. I know at Spotify you have to do it for each individual episodes, but for iHeart and Apple, you can do it for everybody to see. If you would like to, email us at,
Info on the Go podcast at gmail.com.
and you can find that email link in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious.